LFOs. There are additional LFOs on this thing. I keep hearing people say, wouldn't it be great if there's an additional LFO? You can do it with a sample. So I kind of put the effort in just to kind of provide some waveforms and kind of play around with it a bit more than I have done already, to see what sample-based LFO shapes can do and what it can do and can't do versus like your kind of like, I don't know, built-in LFOs. Most of it can do, which is pretty fun. It sort of sounds slightly different. There's a few little quirky things that you might need to be aware of, but it does some stuff that the standard one doesn't, and it sounds really interesting. So just to break this down a little bit, the thing I've got is there's a software called Audacity, which I kind of always joke about being crap, but it's actually quite useful for this particular purpose for generating waveforms. So you can download it, it's free, and then just, or not bother because I've done it for you, but if you wanted to create different tempos or different speeds of the LFO shape, then Audacity is what you want to use for that. Basically what I've done is I've created a second long waveform, just one sort of complete cycle of a sine wave, a square wave, a triangle wave, some white noise, some pink noise if you prefer that color, which I probably do, and a Brownian brown noise. And you can kind of boot up that waveform in your sampler. So what I've got is I've got the high tom, because I tend to not like the toms on this drum machine or drum computer very much. So I've got the high tom that's playing this sample. I've got the output, the individual output from the high tom to the control input 1. I've got, you go to your control input 1, you go to expression learn, and this is kind of one of the weird little workarounds that I've kind of found you have to do every time you adjust it. You might need to run this to just get an approximation of what the extremities are of that LFO. So what this is going to do is it's going to read like the high and lows of that waveform. So, you know, if we put this back to the start, every time it reaches to the peak and to the you know, +1, -1, it's going to track that. So if you just run this so it does its full cycle, then you've got the full amount. As soon as you sort of change the speed of this, you might need to rerun, you know, if you change the pitch, that is, or the tune, you might have to rerun this to get it more accurate. I found when you're pitching the waveform up, so i.e. your LFO is going to be going quicker, it tends to track okay, but when you pitch it down, whatever it's got going on in the rhythm in terms of how it translates pitches, it sort of loses a little bit. Like the noticeable difference is it doesn't seem to go to the extremities as much. So if you've got modulations to high and low, you notice that drops off a little bit. You could obviously just, you know, turn it up, but hitting expression learn is quite useful. After you've done that, I just go to control input 1 because this is what I've got in there, and you can just see this modulating, and then you can decide what you want to modulate on this page. So at the moment I've got, if I put these back to like standard zeros, you can hear there's this little riff going. There's no, let me make sure. Yeah, there's no keyboard tracking or modulation or anything. It's just kind of flat frequency setting. Yeah, and depending where you put your center point for whatever you're modulating will influence how high up or how low down that modulation. So this is kind of like, if it's the filter, this is the center point. But you probably already know this. And then, yeah, you're kind of modulating, and then you've got LFOs. So, you know, you can use this one for something else, which is great. Invert it. So this is where your center point comes in. It's dropping. So you high your filter up so you've got some space. Pretty cool, huh? And then I've got low pass filter of the delay. Just adds a little bit of kind of space, I find. It's kind of like a bit of a retro-y short time delay. I've got a filter envelope going on the LFO as well. So that's gliding the envelope on like high setting every time the LFO is going up, and down when it's going down, which is cool. And I've got the feedback on. So the feedback was quite cool in a delay because it's sort of, the feedback can get pretty crazy, as we know. Having this modulating just kind of is another way to tame it. So I found the feedback alongside the delay filter, you can kind of get this kind of almost like a push and pull of the feedback, which is quite interesting. It's a subtle difference, but it just adds a bit of movement. You kind of tend to not think it's doing anything sometimes, but it's noticeable when you turn it off. So I'll show you what I mean. So you can just hear it. It's this kind of almost this movement backwards and forwards into the feedback delay, which is quite cool. Yeah, so it's LFOs, right? So it's extra LFOs. So the other cool thing I'll show you, you can set, set whatever wave shape. So this is the sine tone. If you want to use a different one, select square. I've noticed this weird thing that it doesn't. Yeah, one of the things I've kind of got set up is that I've got a trig at the start that only fires like on the first. No, it doesn't. I turned it off. But I had this set up so it only fires on the first. That's quite useful if you want it to re-trigger every time. So what it would do is it will trigger the LFO at the start point from whenever you start it. But the thing to be aware of is that when you start changing the waveform, it's not going to re-trigger because it's already done it once. You have to stop it and start it again. So that's something to be aware of. So you can see it's always starting at the start. Why that's relevant is because if this was turned off, it ain't going to trigger unless you fire it. And then if you fire it like that, it's just going to go whenever it wants. So having that at the start, I find if you want to retrig, it's quite useful. If you just want to trigger it once you press play, basically. Obviously, if you wanted to put, a pattern or whatever, which we might get into, is pretty cool as well. It's going to trigger all the time. So you can do that. So another feature within the normal LFO is like the phase. I don't know what they've called this, like maybe starting phase point, perhaps. So where it starts in that in the wave shape. So obviously you can do that with start points, which is quite cool. So if you wanted to, start this cycle, instead of it starting from the beginning, you start it from the middle, you can just drag that over. And I found like the whole thing's 120, whatever that is, 120 increments, which is a second, but it's calculated as 120, which is luck. So you can kind of put this at 50, maybe put this one at 70, and then you've got like a shorter waveform. But if you put it at 50, it's going to start there, which is quite cool. But you notice it's behave. Hang on, I put this on the first. I must have pressed it twice. Yeah, it's going to keep going back round, which is interesting behavior because it looks like I didn't know this, but it looks like whatever the trig state you put in is not set as the same as this, so it's going to do it every time. Don't know, it's a bit weird. So I think it's just a case of what I've done is putting I don't know what they call them, a non-trig or just a trig or without a note, I don't know, the yellow one. Put that to 0 and then it seems to cycle around, which is cool, and it always starts on that bit, which is quite cool. So you can use a square wave, so you can hear different modulations of the square wave. I mean, this is all like the same as the LFO, but just to kind of show it works. You get these weird, like, I always call these pinking or pink, like it's a kind of, like you get this in hardware compressors a lot, and you don't get them in the software equivalents, but you hear this like little high frequency ding sort of sound. I really like that. I think it comes across in compressors because it's basically that it's just abruptly snapping one volume state to another, and this is kind of doing the same thing but on a frequency. to get these interesting like polyrhythm type things because it's running at its independent rate, right? Which is quite cool. I mean, you're going to get that quick manipulation in your standard LFOs. So I think this is really powerful. And something I like to do pretty much in every video I've ever done is this sort of kind of pseudo keyboard tracking effect, which is just kind of, you have to kind of program in the phases, but if based on that, it tracks like high notes and low notes against whatever you're modulating. So this uses up an LFO, and now we've kind of got this set up with the sample LFOs. We can still do the keyboard tracking, and we've got this modulation, which is quite cool. Yeah, so some pretty crazy spaces. You get this rhythmical shifting happening because the LFO is like dictating more or less like a prominent rhythm over the tempo set by the sequencer, which is great. I'm a big fan of that because the rhythm can tend to be a bit locked to the main tempo. Yeah, it's pretty cool. We can try different different envelopes. Let's try to. I quite like this one actually. Let's have it running free. You get some weird kind of sort of more silky movement. It's like more gluey. So this thing on the effects is basically triggering, again, like the keyboard tracking idea, but with delay time. Something I do a lot. Just gives you that finer details on the delay. Get some more dubby kind of grittiness because stuff gets doubled up, which is quite nice. Yeah, I thought it was pretty neat. The noise stuff, I've kind of not played around with too much. It would be really good to kind of take a snapshot, like a sample and whole kind of thing. But I mean, it does some interesting stuff. Let's restart. So there we go. We'll just run it free. So this, yeah, I've not played around with it too much, but I'm imagining it's just texture and weird modulation. So it might be quite good for kind of abstract kind of soundscapey things maybe, or if subtly used in sine tones, maybe to add some pitch modulation or something. I don't know. So let's do this expression learn thing so it tracks it. It might make a slight difference. Yeah, you can see it kind of makes a subtle difference there. Yeah, it's taking out those top notes. It felt like a gritty, dubby kind of abstract movement thing. Those top notes were kind of killing it. Yeah, some interesting stuff. So I'm going to leave it there. I quite like it. I quite like this waveform approach or sample approach. The project's going to have these samples in there. So like I say, brown, pink, and the sign, square, triangle. But yeah, I mean, you can loop small points. You can reverse them. You can do all the stuff. You could even, modulate the sample using the built-in LFO. There's like kind of loads of stuff you could do. You can do stuff, like pitching it around. You could draw your own waveform. You could use like your own simple beat or something as a modulator. So there's loads of things you could do. But I kind of wanted to just use the basic wave shapes and it be accurately tracking it to be sure it does it, and it seems to do it quite well, which I'd expect because this is what it's built for. But yeah, download the project, have a play around, and cheers for hanging in there. Cheers.